Julius Caesar left very tantalizing clues in his writing about the Gauls and the Celts. He spoke about how they used a human telegraph system, which was highly effective. What they would do was they would have a lookout who would be stationed, would have a loud voice, and within hearing range would be another lookout who would hear what he would say and then transmit the message on. And quite literally they could transmit a spoken message across vast distances, probably from one side of France to the other, in a matter of hours, using this system. This is technology that's different, and this is why the Romans considered the Celts and the Gauls to be barbarians, because they had a technology that was different. But it brings up an interesting thing. You listen right here now. That's the sound of nothing. And as quiet as this is in the middle of the countryside, and all you can hear is the odd bird or maybe a dog barking in the distance, this is still not as silent as what it would have been in a pre-technological age. We're talking about absolute silence, beyond the natural silence. There would be no interference from Wi-Fi and other kinds of transmissions and radio signals, mobile phone signals. What you would have would be the human ear picking up perfectly distinguishable sounds and tones within the natural environment. So therefore you could have like a Native American Indian, someone like an Iroquois or a Mohican up in upstate New York or on the Canadian border, what became Canada, could distinguish the difference between a man stepping on a twig and an animal, and they knew they were being stalked by an enemy. This is a phenomenal ability that we've lost. We've sacrificed so much in terms of our connectivity to the natural environment. We don't watch animals in the wild anymore. We watch nature shows on TV. We have people, celebrity scientists, who tell us about the real world and nature, and you have to accept everything they say as undisputed fact, even if it's an astrophysicist who's telling you about animals or plants or fauna. But you'll never see things like someone on TV reaching over and grabbing something like these. These are haws. These are hawberries, okay? And these are completely edible. Extremely healthy. We're surrounded by food. But we're surrounded by not just nutrition and medicine in the form of plants. We're surrounded by nutrition and medicine in the form of the environment, which nourishes our psychology and spiritual depth. Again, this has been taken from us. We have been slowly domesticated towards essentially being TV animals. The TV is the zoo, and to a lesser extent the internet, but at least the internet is still a participant, objective, subjective engagement. You still have control over the conversation to a limited degree. This is one of the reasons they rue ever giving us the internet, because we started whispering in the woodsheds again. Dogs barking in the distance. I don't know if you can hear that, but there's dogs barking wildly in the distance now. That dog has heard me speaking. That dog is probably a couple of 100 yards away. That dog has picked up my voice speaking in this area, because no one comes around here. It's so remote. He's probably on a farm or somewhere. He's probably a farmer's dog. But he knows I'm here and he knows I'm talking. Human beings, hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago, would have been able to have the same ability to listen to a voice being spoken in the distance, the sound of a footsteps. They could even hear an army on the march by putting their ear to the ground. This is how heightened their senses were. They didn't have tinnitus. They didn't have Wi-Fi. They didn't have all this impact upon their sensory perceptions. And now we have the opposite. We live in a world of sensory overload. There are so many people who literally do not know what to do with themselves because they're overloaded in their sensory faculties. They don't know how to exist outside a sensory impacted area. When I say sensory, I don't mean birds and trees and the wind blowing or rivers flowing. I'm talking about TV, advertising, media, movement, everything like that would impact upon them. They get so used to it and they get so changed neurologically by it, and their brain chemicals become so regulated by things like the TV news, or even having a TV on, that they can't exist without it. I can remember well before I, quote unquote, woke up, I used to watch TV just like anyone else, and whenever there was a power failure, and one time there was a power failure that lasted a few days because one day there was a power failure lasted a few days because the power system went down in a hurricane. And I can remember feeling out of sorts and not quite myself. And then when the TV kicked back in, I actually felt better. Now, I'm not a doom monger, but if the day ever came when something did happen, perhaps an asteroid passed up in the upper atmosphere and caused an electromagnetic pulse which knocked out all the electrical systems on Earth, destroyed all the solenoids, all the motors, all the transmission systems, even destroyed the power stations, the turbines. The zombie apocalypse will be terrifying for people who know no other way to live except frozen pizza and TV. The first thing that will happen is, because of their high carbohydrate, high salt, high MSG diet, they will suddenly have crashes. This will lead to irrational thinking because they've so little saturated fat that built their brain structure. This is by design, by the way. This is why they used to feed gruel to orphans in Victorian times, Oliver Twist and so on, and prisoners. Gruel stopped them from thinking. Gruel stopped them from being strong. Because of their dietary problems, the next thing happens, they will have a hypoglycemic shock, and they'll be unable to actually do anything. They'll be so weak. If this happens in winter, they will die of hypothermia pretty quickly. And people say when the system when the system breaks down and the shit hits the fan, they try to always make out it's going to be like that movie The Road, or that film with Charlton Heston. I can't forget what it was called, The Omega Man, or that film with Charlton Heston, The Omega Man, where it's a free-for-all, it's murderous, it's killing. And that will happen in limited circumstances, but I truly believe, and this is not naivety, that in many cases human beings will naturally come together and take care of themselves. I know what I'll be doing. I'll be looking for haws, blackberries, dandelions, as well as any kind of food I have stored up, which will be high-protein food. And I'll be waiting for things to get better again, because they will. Because human beings are far more incredible than what our leaders tell us we are. We're far more decent, and we do care about each other. Just because psychopaths run the world doesn't mean that the rest of us have to pick up or follow their psychopathic ways and their mindset. If you can just want to consider one fact that will really make you think, is know this, that if something happened tomorrow and all the governments of the world were suddenly unable to govern, the murder rate on this planet through wars, through corporate extermination and everything else would rapidly drop. We would suddenly have global peace on a level we've never had.